Hi there, good afternoon. This is Jeffrey at North Tahoe High School. I'm here to talk with you this afternoon all about the junior year and a pretty pivotal year for students and families alike. And so thank you for joining me today. If you're watching this as a recording, just some logistical things to mention. This is a recording clearly, so if you're watching this later or if you're watching live, you can't really fast forward. But if you are watching after the fact, you can fast forward to things that maybe you're pretty familiar about. Or go back and rewind if you want to hear something again. A link to the actual presentation content is in the description of the video below, and I would encourage you to download that. That's something that might be helpful to look at over the course of this year. This video is also intended for parents, families, guardians, and students, and so definitely most typically the parent is the one or guardian is the one watching this video. But I would definitely encourage the students to watch through this as well, because we're going to cover some important stuff that everybody needs to be aware of as we go through the junior year. All right, just a couple ideas of what we are going to be covering today. Will be up here on the screen, and you'll see me kind of playing my own director over here as I kind of change screens and stuff, but we'll watch along. You'll kind of see, I hope to share with you some of these key items that you can now see on the screen. And so we're going to talk about kind of where, what, when, how do we do things. We'll update you on some of the community service requirements, talking about and reminding you about studying, and a couple notes that we're going to mention as we come out of this COVID pandemic. I'm going to highlight some information on reading transcripts. The junior class actually did get a chance to read transcripts, and talking about some of the college process. All right, I'm going to give you kind of the first part of the key pieces of information that you need to know to be ready for the college search process and understanding how the colleges actually do some of that. I'll highlight a few tips and tricks about some tools that you have access to as families and students, which we will go through over the upcoming school year. We're going to talk about testing. Apparently, I forgot a G, but testing. And that has changed pretty dramatically in the last 2 years. And so I'll give you a couple highlights about that. And then I'll just, since we're doing this virtually, I'll give you a couple tips on how to actually manage questions and a couple upcoming events that we'll have that will be helpful for you as families. All right, so we're going to kind of jump in here, and you'll see me on and off the screen kind of in your lower corner as we go through the workshop, depending on the slide that we're on. But just know that, yes, I am here live in my office right now doing this. And so, it's 2:30 on a Friday, so I hope you guys get this as a great kickoff to our actual weekend. So a couple just reminders as we work our way through our presentation. The first one is about our counseling website. There is a lot of resources that are available, and I probably will show you at the very end of this presentation. I'll actually show you a little bit of our website and where you can find a couple key resources. But basically, this is a tool that I keep updated, and you can find it under the programs menu. Our website changes over time, and so both our school website and our website on the counseling end of things. But we're always going to be found for the time being under the programs menu, and then you'll click on the school counseling menu, and that will take you to our website, which oftentimes looks something similar to this. You might see a different picture, a few other menu items or buttons up there throughout the year, but ultimately it's going to have a very similar feel and a look. A couple things is along the top of your screen that you can see. A couple quick links are going to be the stuff that are kind of the frequently accessed items, and that's going to be something that I would encourage you guys to explore. You can also look underneath the counseling support menu, and there's a bunch of drop downs and menu items that you can click on and explore there too. Just some reminders that we do book our appointments online, so that link, that button that you see on the screen there, will take you directly to a program called Calendly, which will link with our calendars, both myself and our 9th and 10th grade counselor, because I'm only working with the 11th and 12th graders this year, which is a great celebration. Not because I don't like 10th graders, but it reduces the amount of students that I have to work with and lets me focus more closely on that junior and senior class. Ms. Alcaraz, who, if you have younger children, will be working with our 9th and 10th graders this year. They both link with our Google Calendars, and will show you the up-to-date information on when we have availability to meet, answer questions, and things like that. So just make yourself available there. Just also note that in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll also, typically during school hours, you can actually chat with us. So there's a chat feature that you can, if you have a quick question, you can type in a question there, and we're happy to answer when we're available in the meeting. Sometimes we're not available even if it says we are, just because maybe we have a student in our office. But just know that that's available, and we do monitor that feature. Throughout our presentation today, we will spend some time talking about education after high school. We'll be spending time looking at essentially the breakdown of how education can pay for itself over time. All right, and so it's pretty true that this is factual in terms of kind of like the higher education you get, typically the more you will earn monetarily, as well as the least amount of unemployment. That holds up pretty statistically. However, we also know that that's not totally the full picture. Okay, especially in the recent 5-10 years or so, we kind of went through a big shift in education that really pushed everybody getting 4-year college degrees, and we're kind of, we like pendulum swings in education. So we go one way and then we kind of shift to the other way. And right now we're kind of shifting back to probably middle of the road. But, the focus on this presentation will be somewhat around this idea of college after high school. But just know that there are tons of opportunities for trades, technical work, okay, and the demand and pay is in respect to that demand. And so students that are interested in not necessarily attending more formal education in a classroom setting have lots of opportunities outside of high school. All right, but our motto and our kind of model here at the high school is that college should be available for all, but it might not be the right plan for everybody. What that means is basically we want to set up students, and that's our approach when we're talking about scheduling, when we're talking about different items, that every student should have the opportunity should they want to. Okay, but that does not mean that every student should, maybe it's not the best place, the best path for their future. All right, and so just keep that in mind as we go through this, but we will spend some time on college when we're looking at this item. It's the big thing is about actually knowing what you want. And that's a big thing that we focus on in 10th and 11th grade, is defining and knowing what your goals are, so that as you are working through high school, but also as you pursue plans and steps to get ready for after high school, you're working in the right direction. Okay, so there's this idea of we want everyone to be successful, but that means just like pursuing learning, pursuing innovation, pursuing knowledge. Okay, and that can look very different. That might be becoming a welder. That might be becoming a pastry chef. That might be working in a family business, starting a daycare. Different things look different for people, and measures of success are different. Okay, and it's not necessarily about a prestigious program or college or even a degree. All right, so I just want to always like to highlight that. So, community service update. Okay, we're going to try to get through some of the logistics as we go through here, but there are going to be community service requirements. However, it's always going to be subject to change. And what you see on the screen here is kind of what the junior class, this class of 2023, will need cumulatively by the time they graduate in June of 2023. So you will need 8 hours at this point from your senior year. And if you're paying attention, you're not in your senior year yet. Okay, so right now there's no community service hours retroactively, so we are not expecting hours from the past, and we're not expecting hours from this current 21-22 school year. All right, so we will expect hours at this point from your senior year next year. Okay, and I also realize that many of you maybe haven't even done any yet, so it's going to take some refreshing of our memories once we get there, but we will hit that in the fall of next year as we kind of approach that. We're pretty much not encouraging community service. That's why we've done away with the requirement, because it might put people in an unsafe situation that we do not want. The next bit is really kind of about this idea of study skills and study habits. And ultimately, that is something that we see take a toll. And there's a couple caveats that I like to point out here, especially with the 18 months or so that we're coming out of. First is school will hopefully, knock on wood, look very different this year than it has in the past, right? We're hoping that, currently in this time, we're seeing a little bit of a spike in COVID cases and things like that in our community, but hopefully things will level out. Hopefully things will kind of change as we kind of move further into the school year. But studying will have to come back into this realm of things. And this junior class is in a situation where we're kind of in a precarious spot. Because normally, in a outside of COVID, normally this transition from 10th grade to 11th grade can be pretty tenuous, and mostly from an academic standpoint. There's a lot of increased opportunities for rigor, increased opportunities for higher level expectations and higher level courses that students oftentimes will take on. And a lot of it is natural. A lot of it is kind of part of that progression, but some of it is maybe a little bit extreme. And so we just kind of are wrapping up our course request and add drop deadline here today, actually. But one thing I just want to kind of spend just a minute on is this idea of spending time outside of school. Okay, and knowing that I actually stole this from Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. They do 30 to 40. College looks slightly different in terms of time in class and studying. But this idea is that students should be spending at least 1 to 2 hours a night studying. And that typically equates to about 30 to 40 minutes a night per academic course. Okay, so you can kind of look at it as if you're kind of taking mostly college prep classes, maybe you have 3 or 4 academic classes. I mean, most students will have a math class, English class, history class, maybe a science class in there too. You should be spending probably 1 to 2 hours a night studying, which looks like prepping for the next day. It looks like creating lesson plans and things like that. So, or not lesson plans, but reviewing prior notes and such. So that's just something to keep in mind, and use that as a target. It could be an average. You might spend a little more on some nights, a little less on others. Okay, but as we come out of distance and hybrid learning, it's an important reminder that we just need to set aside time, because here's what juniors end up doing. They tend to spend a lot of time in other ways, and kind of on the screen you can kind of see a little bit of what the average is, but most juniors, like I said, take on more in that 11th grade year. They start, instead of having maybe 1 or 2 AP classes, they might take 3 or 4 or 5. And so that the expectations are very high. Okay. So I just want to make sure that is in there. So let's talk a little bit about how do we support our juniors this year as we go through this school year. So one of the biggest things is that junior year has tons of pros. Okay, and this is pros for both students and their families. So one of the things that I noticed quite a bit about the junior year versus 9th or 10th grade year is that, generally speaking, there's kind of this magic time frame that happens in the summer between 10th and 11th grade that students start to actually kind of connect with the life that they are seeing at the end of the tunnel, this light that we have for students. Okay, and so they see that high school is important. They start to see that high school has a lot of opportunities. Students also get to choose more things with their year in high school. So they get to have more choice of what maybe they want to do throughout the year, so the classes they're taking and things like that. But generally, students become a little bit better students. They're a little more focused. They're a little bit more on top of things, a little bit more deadline oriented, a little bit more serious academically. All right. Another pro, and again for both students and families, is that students can generally start driving. Okay, so this opens up opportunities for other things like extracurricular activities with sports, or looking at college classes or jobs, or just a little bit more freedom. All right, so that's a big pro for students. They are also, generally speaking, more mature, okay, both in and out of school. And we'll talk just in a little bit about why those two asterisks are there. But they're ready to step up to a challenge. And so we see them not getting in trouble, usually for little things. Sometimes they make bigger decisions that are negative and have maybe larger consequences. But generally speaking, they're not quote unquote annoying like maybe a 9th or 10th grader could potentially be in a class or at lunchtime or things like that. And so ultimately they are much more in that mature mindset. A lot of times they're also actually able to tackle things more independently. So they're going to be demanding more responsibility from both us at school and also you guys at home. So that's just something that we really need to know. The other thing is our brains, when we're in this kind of 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old window, is on fire for absorbing and processing information. Okay. It's just ready to rock and roll. The connections are right there. And so we have to kind of just scaffold that, meaning we have to provide the right environment, both at school and at home, for that to really click. And so we'll talk a little bit about that throughout this presentation as well. A couple more things that we really kind of need to look at too are some of the cons. These are the kind of warning areas that we need to kind of keep an eye out for. Like I mentioned, with students taking on more academically, okay, the stress levels that are associated and some of the, if we're using a clinical term, comorbid things that are associated with that. So stress oftentimes is a precursor for high, anxiety attacks and depression and potentially suicidality or suicidal ideation or just different things or other unhealthy coping mechanisms. This can be something to keep an eye out for. Okay, and sometimes it's not something it's not something we see right away. Sometimes we see it a little later in the fall, especially as seasons start to change too. That just kind of naturally happens in some circumstances. But families and students, even for yourself and for your friends, keep an eye out and just know that there are different things that we are doing at school, which we'll touch on briefly here in just a second as well, to support students in these areas. And so we'll talk more about that. The other thing is kind of like when students maybe are not doing as well as a junior and had not done as well in the past. So basically, if you've kind of dug yourself a little bit of a hole in that 9th and 10th grade window, it could be a time frame when you are actually having trouble and you need to actually get yourself out of it. Okay. And so sometimes you might have a pretty big hole to fill. And so that's something too that we want to kind of jump on right away. And if you are in that circumstance, please talk to me because we have different opportunities like credit recovery. We had an actual summer school this last summer, but we also have some credit recovery options this school year that you can take advantage of if you're wanting to kind of get back on track. So like I said, those two asterisks about students being more mature, they want to be treated more like adults than kids in this year. However, that scaffolding that's needed, the teenage brain at this point is not capable, physiologically not capable of steering them towards good decisions, and not always, but it's something that is a very big challenge for them, this in this age range. And so that prefrontal cortex in the front of our brain is where we're thinking about the consequences of an action. So if adults, when we think back, we have this hindsight's 20/20 vision, and the teenagers are really kind of in the moment. And they're not really thinking like, if I get in this car as a driver or even as a passenger and we're going to drive 100 miles an hour on Highway 28 out here, we're not thinking that, we can get pulled over, we can have our license taken away, we can get in an accident, we can kill someone, we can kill someone in our vehicle, like we can get severely injured. There's severe consequences to this decision. It's really just about that rush of adrenaline. And so it's something that we want you to, to battle with. All right. And so that battle is a challenge for families and parents and guardians as well, because this time frame is when you're kind of transitioning from managing. So a lot of parents and families manage 9th graders and manage even 10th graders. And sometimes, it's tough because this transition to 11th grade year, adults in the student's life want to keep managing. And it's kind of this fine line of how do we manage and how do we let go?
if you look it up on YouTube, there's this video with Sir David Attenborough, I believe, from Planet Earth or something like that, where this goose, I think, some bird, is at the top of this cliff, and they build the nest at the top of this cliff, and ultimately it's kind of a scary and depressing video to start, but it's got a really good message at the end. But if you Google it, gosling taking flight, the gist of it is this duckling or gosling jumps out of their nest at the top of a cliff, and the video kind of pans its way down, and you'll see this young bird with barely any feathers trying to fly, and you keep watching it fall, and you keep watching it fall, and it hits a rock, and you keep watching it fall, and it hits another rock, and you keep watching it fall, and eventually you'll see the two geese parents come into the frame next to it, kind of floating, but not able to save it. They're not catching it. They're not doing anything. Okay, they're kind of along for the ride, for lack of a better word. And you keep watching, and it hits the ground, and you just think, oh my goodness, what did I just watch? And you see the parents laying next to it, and a little bit later, kind of dramatic effect of movies and TV, but just a few seconds later, you see the young bird start stirring, get up, and the parents walking over to it and taking care of it and things like that. And then David Attenborough comes back on and says, this is a normal part of this bird's life cycle. They're designed in a way that they are not breaking. Okay, even though they went through these troubling things, they are resilient, and this is how they learn to fly. And if the parents interrupted that process, they would never learn, and eventually they become too heavy, and eventually that fall might really severely injure them. Okay, so I want you to think about that. A long-winded way of saying I want you to think about this battle of managing, rescuing, throwing that life raft out, and letting go and letting the student experience potentially natural consequences or experience the struggle. Okay, another way to look at it is this idea of an epiphany. Don't steal the epiphany. Okay, and that means let them go through this revelation process themselves. This is a big year for that because it's going to get a little harder next year. Okay, so here's a couple things what we see over the years of high school. So in 9th grade, what you see on the screen is this kind of breakdown of effort and undertaking. So how challenging and how much students are taking on over the course of time. So 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And so in 9th grade, students are generally taking a relatively basic course load, kind of on purpose. It ramps up a little bit in 10th grade. And then in 11th grade, they kind of peak. They come up here and they get to this point where they're taking on a lot. They're trying to do everything for a lot of students. And then in 12th grade, they kind of usually will take it back a little bit even. Not everybody, but it seems like 11th grade's a peak academically, and they change their focus in 12th grade. They might not need 6 classes; they might take 4 or 5, and so generally speaking, the effort undertaking shifts slightly. And this is an early warning because in the spring of 12th grade, and we're hitting this hard with the 12th graders, but in the spring of 12th grade, they crash. And this is kind of that spring time frame, and there's actually a formal, quote-unquote, formal diagnosis for this, and it's called senioritis. I know that you're juniors, but this is something that I want you to think about because this can also present in junior year as well. It's way more common in senior year, but definitely in junior year we see this too. And so it's something that usually happens around March or April when the snow up here melts and the beach starts looking better than the classroom. And so just keeping an eye on, we want to see consistency in effort and energy over time. Okay. This year, it's also very important to find balance. Okay. And emphasize this idea of both being and feeling full. All right. So yes, we want students to take challenging courses. Yes, we want them to be successful. We want them to be happy and healthy as well. And that's tough. It's a tough balancing act to hold on to. All right. But I want to emphasize that second sentence that you see up here, that these activities that students might participate in, they might not be resume builders. They might not be academic. And they, the idea of everything should look good on a college application. These items may not be that. okay, but they're important for the student. And I want them to spend time doing things that makes them feel whole, okay? We are preparing students not for college, but for life after high school, okay? And so we want to focus on the key stuff that's important, okay? But we don't want to push out the things that make high school enjoyable. And this is extra important now coming out of distance learning and hybrid, in that one of our big goals here is to kind of bring back the fun, bring back the enjoyment of high school, and help us do that from home as well. Okay, we want to find balance. It can't just be fun. Okay, it's got to have the balance and rigor as well. But only focusing on school is equal and healthy. We don't want to be on either really end of that spectrum. There are a couple ways that we're going to be supporting all students this year. In social emotional supports, we did shift very heavily into the social emotional world over COVID and the lockdowns because of that need. And I realize, and we all recognize that, you know, we didn't have pathways. We didn't have a lot of some of the academic and college and career elements that would be quote unquote normal in a year, because we spent so much time. I mean, we did daily lessons in social emotional supports. We went through 38 competencies in the last year, okay, that with students through video format. We're taking a little bit different approach this year, but students will receive daily mindfulness lessons in their first period class. And then all students will also receive monthly social emotional learning focused pathways lessons. So once a month in pathways instead of every day, students will be receiving a grade level specific social emotional lesson. Okay. I also want to mention that my office, I am not just here for changing classes and talking about college, but my office is also available for social emotional support, as is the Wellness Center. And Hillary and Jess, who will be up there, are super awesome individuals that students connect super well with. All right. And so ultimately, you know, we're here to support students throughout the year. Now, with that being said, we're going to transition very quickly into taking a look at what a transcript looks like, okay? And this is an important thing that I wanted to cover with the junior families, because in Pathways, probably this week, you probably looked at students, your junior transcripts so far, so where you're at coming into this junior year. And I want to highlight, because we haven't had a chance to really do this, highlight some key pieces of what a transcript looks like and is comprised of. So up here on the screen, what you see is basically an overview of where this would be the end of a junior year transcript, and this picture is what students can send to colleges. This is what students will send to employers. This is what a real transcript looks like. You have access to all this on Aries. It looks slightly different when we print it at school, but you do have access to all this information that you can check, and I would encourage that you regularly do. And by regularly, I mean like after each major grading period, because it's not going to change in between, really. We do review this. I review these every year at least once or twice, generally twice, once at the beginning, once at the end of the school year. And then students do review these in the fall of every year. It's a little delayed this year just because of the week that we did not have school. But generally speaking, there's three main areas on your transcript you need to be aware of. Number one is kind of in this upper section with, you'll see, I don't have a laser pointer, but you know, a kind of where it's in those gray bars. Each of those is a term. Okay, and so for example, on the upper left, you see grade 9, term 1. That would be the first semester of 9th grade for this student. And you'll see the name of the classes, the grades, and on the right side, you see two columns of numbers. Those are going to be the credits, and that's how we determine graduation. You have to earn credits. And you earn credits in high school for any grade of D- or higher. Okay, so any grade that you see on that area that's a D- or higher will have equal columns. If for some reason one of those grades was an F, you'd see 5 on the left and 0 on the right, attempted and completed. And then you see the semester GPAs at the bottom. So how many credits you earned and the total GPA towards the bottom of each term. All right. And so those are really areas I want you to check. Check that the grades are right that you're expecting. Check that the course titles are correct, that we're not missing anything. Okay. The next thing that we'll look at is down here. And so these are the other two areas I want you to pay attention to. Kind of on the left side of your screen, you'll see our GPAs.
We actually report 6, believe it or not. And there's a whole video. If you go to the YouTube page and go to the frequently asked questions playlist on the YouTube page, you can actually watch, and it will tell you how our GPAs are calculated. Okay, but in a nutshell, we report 6 because they mean slightly different things. The columns, weighted and non-weighted, so advanced placement courses, UC transferable classes, things like college classes, receive some extra weighting in GPA. The non-weighted is also something that's very important for us to report because it's about equity in general when people are looking at that. The rows, the top 2 are academic GPA, and so there might be classes. For example, on the screen you see towards the top it says an asterisk equals non-academic. Those classes that are denoted with that star in those list of classes are not included in these first 2 rows. They would be included in the bottom row. All right, and only classes that have a letter grade are included in a GPA calculation. So pathways, anything that's pass, no pass, or pass fail is not included. All right, so the third area is on the right side, and that's your credit summary. All right, and this is something that we look at to make sure that you've cleared all of your credits. So in this student's circumstance, at the end of their junior year for graduation, this student would only need English 12 and then 5 credits of government and 5 credits of economics, total of 20 credits. This student was in a pretty good spot. Okay, good chances are that this student with kind of pretty decent grades, pretty decent GPA is planning on going to college, and they're not just going to take that. You actually have to take 3 classes to attend school here. But that student would be looking at, they only need the 20 credits to graduate their diploma. They would then need, more to stay enrolled or more to be competitive or more to learn or engage in their learning for college purposes or after high school plans. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some different options for after high school. So we're going to primarily hit briefly on a couple of these different routes, and we'll talk more about this throughout the year. Junior pathways is a very important year of pathways, and I realize most of your juniors really have not had much pathways, maybe a half a year from 9th grade. It's going to look different this year in junior year, and I promise you 11th grade pathways is pretty awesome. So with the different options that we see up here, the 4-year college universities is going to be where students will be applying, and it's a competitive application for these different universities. And probably the most common ones that people use are going to be the University of California or UC system, the CSU or California State University system, the 23 different campuses there, private schools, which are both in California and out of California and abroad, and then out-of-state public schools, say, for example, like the Florida State University system and the Texas State University systems, for example. We also have the junior college system, called kind of different things. Junior college, community college, 2-year colleges all mean the same thing. Some examples might be like Sierra College in Rockland or Truckee, Lake Tahoe Community College, American River College, Butte College, things like that. We have trade or vocational schools, so that's going to be, basically skipping a lot of the extraneous courses. So a lot of times you're not taking math and English unless it's really associated with what your focus is. You're going to be doing the main things that are going to help you get in, get out, and have the skills to go get a job that requires additional training. Some common examples of that might be like Universal Technical Institute for auto mechanics, Culinary Institute of America for those that want to go into the culinary trade or culinary fields, welding schools, different things like that. You can go straight to a career or work. I always like to denote there's a difference between a career and a job. All right, a job is to help you get by. A career has growth and engages your mind and things like that. And so some students start in a job and then transition into a career. Other students really focus on, I want to go into a career. Maybe you're going to run, like I said, a family business or something like that. And then you have all the different kind of like, I would say less commonly pursued paths, but not less useful or less needed, but just not as frequently used here at the school. But enlisting in the military, looking at the Peace Corps, gap years, studying abroad, different other opportunities. All right, so we'll talk a little bit more about those in the future as well. But for today's purpose, we're going to spend a little bit of time on 4-year colleges in particular because that's a big component of what students in our school look at. So there's this idea of something called comprehensive review. And this is how many schools will evaluate students. And like I said,
four-year college admissions is competitive. All right, it is something that students have to compete for. And so I always like to use this example, and this is probably the example when I say college admissions, most people would associate it with a view of a tree that looks kind of like this. If I asked families and I said, please describe this tree. You know, you might be able to say like, hey, maybe it's bigger, so it's not necessarily a brand new tree. I would guess that maybe it's alive, but I couldn't really tell. It looks pretty solid. Doesn't look like it's got any pests or termites or anything like that in there. Okay, so I can take some basic looks at this tree and make some assumptions. Okay, but I can't really tell a whole lot. And this is what most people think and associate with this idea of college admissions. They say they're gonna look at my GPA, my transcript, and my test scores. All right, so you know, and that's kind of it. And so realistically, what comprehensive review looks like is this. So it's a zoomed out lens of a student's experience. And there are a few school systems that do kind of look in that zoomed in view, but most, especially nowadays after COVID, have really transitioned to this comprehensive review, or another way to look at it is holistic review. And so they look at this tree from the bigger picture. They say, oh, this tree is alive. I can clearly see that it's green, right? Or whatever color it's supposed to be. It looks like it's pretty healthy. It looks like it's pretty well developed. It looks like it's well rounded. It's got a lot of support. Okay, things like that. It hasn't been struck by lightning. Okay, they can tell the environmental factors from some of it. You know, they might not be able to tell all. Like, I don't have a whole picture of the environment surrounding it, but you know, I can tell that it's not necessarily right next to a stream or a water source. You know, I can tell that it's not in competition for other spots either. So like there's not a ton of trees around it. Okay, but it just gives us a better picture of what that might mean. This list is actually from the UC system. And what this is a list of some of the comprehensive review items. And this actually needs a little bit of updating because the second point on there, test scores, are actually not considered anymore. And we'll talk more about testing in just a few minutes. But this idea of comprehensive review, these are things that the universities that your students may be applying to in another year and a half or so really take into consideration. I would say that probably it will kind of go down in order in terms of importance. Okay, so yes, your academics, your GPA, courses that you've got, you know, that you've taken through high school, things like that, are likely going to weigh more heavily on a college admissions officer's minds than potentially like your accomplishments within your life experiences or some special talent that you might have. Okay, but they're all looked at and they're all considered. Okay, and those little ones, kind of the smaller scale items, can really help tip a scale one way or the other potentially down the road. Okay, so kind of bigger picture wise, when we're looking at developing an application list, and this is something that we will review at the end of junior year again, and we will review in much more detail in your senior year, but to kind of give you an idea and a rough target to think about in this world of four-year colleges especially, is we need to focus on diversity and diversification in two primary areas in this process. Number one is developing a list that's diverse in terms of your admissions requirements. Okay, and this is something that you have to look at as an individual. This is not a peer project. Okay, this is not a group project that we're working on. You can do some research in groups, but you need to focus on yourself. You get to be a little selfish in this process. So when you are looking at this, you do need to try to diversify where you're applying. And what I mean by that is you kind of see a breakdown. This is a rough outline. A lot of people have different opinions, but this is kind of a generally agreed upon starting place. But you have on the right, it says reach. And these are going to be highly selective institutions if you want. You don't have to have any reach schools, but you know, sometimes maybe you should. Where you either your qualifications are below what their kind of generally admitted students are, or they're just, doesn't matter what your qualifications are, they're just highly selective. You know, you're talking 5, 10, even 15% admissions rate. Those would be kind of considered reach schools for many students. Okay, so you might want a few of those. The problem becomes when you don't diversify and your entire list is made up of those schools. Okay, you start to play statistics against you. The main group that we want to focus on is this kind of fit, middle of the road schools where you're kind of meeting many of their targets. Okay, so kind of like their percentiles that they're looking for in terms of test scores, maybe if you're doing that route, or GPAs or academic rigor or stuff like that. That's where we want the biggest portion of our list. And then you want potentially, again, you don't have to have any of these. This is just a suggestion, but you want a couple schools that maybe you're exceeding the expectations. Maybe they have a much higher admissions rate that students are more likely to get into. And then at the bottom, you see all these schools should be first choice, meaning do not add schools to your list just because mom or dad tell you to. And mom or dad, I need you to hear that. Okay. Do not tell your children to add schools to their list that they do not want to go to. Okay. I will be upset with you if you do, because what you're doing is you're living vicariously through them, and that's cruel to your student. Okay. Because Murphy's Law does come around, they'll fill out those applications, and potentially this might be the school that lets them in, and they don't have any interest in going there, and you've kind of then screwed your child. Okay. And so ultimately that's something that I want you to pay close attention to, is that each school, you might have a hierarchy of which one is more preferred, but you can see yourself attending any of them that you get into. Okay. The second area, which we're not going to spend time talking about tonight, or I guess this afternoon, is diversifying financially. Okay. We will spend more time on that in the future, but again, it's kind of the same idea. You don't want to apply to only private schools, generally speaking, because you'll only get private school financial results, which could be good, but it could be very bad. Okay, so you want to diversify in that sense too. We're going to talk very briefly at enrollment management. Okay, enrollment management is the new and updated term for college admissions. And that's really what it is. It's gone to a very data science, data-driven system. And so there's kind of this enrollment management funnel. And that's what's on the screen here. The enrollment management funnel is basically in about 7 or 8 different layers. And it kind of goes from top to bottom. And right now, we're kind of in this top red and orange area as juniors. All right. And so they have jobs. Your admissions officers and enrollment management professionals, they're going from kind of trying to identify students to actually getting students on campus and placing deposits. All right. So I'm going to explain this first 3 just to give you an idea. And then you can go back and kind of read through a little bit. But basically, right now, you're kind of probably somewhere in this realm as an incoming junior. All right. So sometimes they're going to be looking at suspects. Okay. So sometimes this could be broken down, and maybe you're getting letters or maybe you're getting emails from colleges saying, hey, have you heard about us? What do you think? Okay. We think you might be a good fit. Come do our session or things like that, which is awesome to do. Sometimes it feels like junk mail, sometimes it is. But ultimately, they oftentimes get information. Okay, and you can kind of see they get lists of students that are in a certain geographical location or have a certain interest that they've responded to a survey or taken a PSAT or things like that. Or they get lists from College Board or different things from AP lists or stuff like that. So they kind of collect student names. And it's not bad to be on that list. That means that something about you has potentially piqued a level of interest. The thing that you don't want to do is get too big of a head of this process. All right. So this does not mean that you are like they know you by name. They could pick you out of a crowd. It does not mean that they are like you're a for sure thing. You're going to get in. It doesn't mean that they necessarily will offer you admissions. Okay. It just means that somehow, some way they got your name on a list. Prospects is this next layer, and basically it takes that idea of being a suspect and they send you some prospective information, and you now become like, hey, okay, you sent me this email. Maybe I responded. Maybe I joined a mailing list. Maybe I attended an information session. Maybe I attended a lunchtime visit when a college admissions officer shows up. Those things are all things that take a student from being a suspect to a prospect, meaning the student showed some sort of initiative and engaged with us in some way. Okay. That next level of respondent kind of takes that level of action and increases it.
All right, so you're more likely to become on this college's more formal radar when you engage in things. And so while this early phase is not as crucial as some of the next phase, which I'm just going to put on the screen so you can see it, you might be someone, if you go through some of this funnel, that in small circumstances, when you get to kind of this applicant phase, there might be 2 or 3 students that are very similar in applicant profile to you. And it could come down to as small of things as, well, these 2 students are what they would call stealth applicants, meaning we've never heard of them or have never shown up on any of our data or radar before they submitted an application, while you were part of our maybe you were part of our prospects list. And it could easily maybe tilt a decision one way or the other. If they're picking one of those 3 students to get in and the 2 are not, they might go with you, because ultimately their goal is to know how many students are going to show up and place a deposit at the end of the game. And their data is showing them that if you've done these different steps, you're more likely to place a deposit and accept admissions. Okay, so big long way to show you that they do pay attention to data, and it goes along with this idea of something called demonstrated interest, meaning you've shown them that they're interested in those schools. Okay, you don't need to fabricate necessarily demonstrated interest, but if you are interested in a school, go sign up for their newsletter, get the updates. Okay, visit schools when they show up on campus, ask questions, put in an interest card, things like that, because you never know what might happen a year from now when you get to the application phase. All right, 2-year colleges. Let's talk a little bit about that. We're going to kind of try to keep us on time. I got about 10 or so minutes left, and we might go slightly over, but we're going to try to finish under an hour or so. But 2-year colleges are another great path. And like I mentioned, there are many paths to being successful in life after high school, and everyone's level of success and measure of success looks different. Okay, there's a couple really huge benefits and a couple warnings that I would give around this idea of junior college. If I was the ruler of the world, every single senior in high school would actually have a decision and an option for junior college after they graduate, considering it as one component of a potential plan that they might want to do. Okay, some of the benefits would be junior college admissions are usually non-competitive, meaning it's not an application, it's an enrollment form. All right, so it's an easy way to have some place to go to school that would be a good fit for you. There might be some competitive programs within some junior colleges, but generally speaking, admissions is non-competitive as long as you graduate from high school. Okay, you also don't need a list of schools where we look back and need 3 fit schools, all that stuff. You don't need to do that, and you don't need to apply to multiple junior colleges. You need to research what school might be the best fit for you, because there's like 114 in California alone. Okay, but it's about finding the right one and then enrolling in that one. Okay, some of the cons are going to be potentially housing is a big one. So that's a big one because most junior colleges, there's only a small handful that actually have anything like dorms or kind of official student housing. Most junior colleges have off-campus housing, so you're going to be responsible for finding your own housing in that town or location. All right. Location can be helpful. They're kind of designed, and there's so many because there's usually, in an hour's throw anywhere in California, there's usually a junior college within that radius. Sizes can vary wildly, so definitely check on that, as well as different program offerings. Okay. The next bullet point talks about some of the offerings that they have, especially if you're looking at, say, going through the transfer process. And so, like I said, you have many ways to get to any goal. Sometimes students maybe didn't have a great experience in high school. Maybe they want to get a bachelor's degree, but maybe they're not competitive or they're not eligible to apply to a 4-year college immediately. You can pursue the junior college transfer path. The other option is maybe you did awesome in high school, and there's different things that come up with financial aid. There's different things with what just fits. Okay, but generally speaking, if you're looking to get a bachelor's degree and you're going through this pathway of junior college, you're going to want to look for programs that are called AA-T, or Associate's Degrees for Transfer. And those are they actually call it a degree with a guarantee. That's a program that will let you complete, you'll kind of create an agreement, you'll complete some pre-specified courses with certain requirements and a target of what school you'd like to attend within the CSU and UC system. And they will then essentially almost have a guaranteed admissions process if you keep up your side of the bargain.
pretty good deal. They're usually cheap, cheaper. A couple other things just to keep in mind, because they're non-competitive, what you might find is that junior colleges can be crowded and take a very heavy emphasis on planning, because they can't limit how many students show up. That funnel of admission, they're not trying to figure out who's going to be there, because anybody can be there. But they don't necessarily have classes offered depending on how many students enroll or don't enroll. Okay, so it's just one thing that's not necessarily the end of the world, but it does take some planning, and that's probably the number one thing. So how do we start? The first thing I always like to encourage students and families to do is develop this idea of what are our must-haves and what are our must-have-nots. Okay, and so usually start pretty broad. Usually start pretty big. Things like location, size of school. Okay, size is a big deal for people that haven't really been outside of Tahoe all that much. Okay, just keep in mind. So large, if I said, what's a large school? And they say Truckee High School, that is not a large school. That is an infinitesimally small college. Okay, so when we say things like large in college, we're talking 20,000 plus students. All right, so it feels like a medium-sized city many times. So just keep that in mind when we're talking size. Sports. This idea of prestige, I want to kind of bust the myth of prestige. There's a lot of books. Frank Brunei, who's an author for the New York Times, wrote a good one if you want to kind of dive deeper into this idea. But I think the title is where you are or who you are is not where you go, or something similar to that. But they talk about, and he investigated the Fortune 500 CEOs, politicians, different things like that who are generally considered successful in today's society, and figured out where they went, and comes to find out that most of them don't go to these hoity-toity schools. Most of them went to state school or junior college, or didn't go to college, or lots of other things. So this idea of prestige is usually fabricated, and it's all about money in marketing. Okay, it's not about the quality of education generally. So I want to kind of just steer you away from that, and it's more about finding that fit. Okay, but you do want to find out, demographics might be important to you. This idea of fitting on campus and finding that fit there is very important for students. Political climate, breakdown of ethnicities, resources and services on campus, like all those types of things. It's now a good time also for families to start talking a little bit more candidly about financial requirements and financial support. All right, with your students, having them understand kind of where you're at. Okay, again, I don't want you to necessarily have this be the driving factor, but this is a good time for you to start having those table conversations. Okay, creating a system to track some of this process. A very common mistake that students have is essentially spending a lot of time doing research and then not writing anything down. And then when I ask them 2 weeks later, what did you research and what did you learn? They're like, don't remember. So start writing some of these key things down. There's some resources on our website that are helpful for that. Starting a spreadsheet. Naviance is a great tool for students to use as well. We're spending also more time showing students how to do that. Okay. I'm not going to show you here, but I will be working with students on this idea of using Supermatched College Search, which is part of the Naviance platform. You can also look up, YouTube's a great tool for that. I think I have a tutorial on Naviance for that as well that you can watch, but just for time's sake, I'm not going to pull that up and show you. You can ask me. I'm happy to sit down, and we will be. One note for the future is not right away. Unfortunately, my time has to be kind of focused initially on the senior class, and we're going to be doing what's called Postsecondary Planning with them, which we will do for your senior year as well. But a little bit later this, probably very early winter, so probably starting around December, maybe January, depending on how things go this fall. We're going to be doing the 11th grade ILP, or Individual Learning Plan process, where we're going to sit down and talk more specifically about you. We're very big picture broad right now. We're going to talk specific about you, your student, understanding what that looks like, okay, and what you are looking at. So let's talk briefly about testing before we kind of go through some wrap-up stuff at the very end of our presentation today. So testing is going to be a little bit kind of in flux still. It's definitely got a little bit more foundation now that we're coming out of COVID, but there's still changes, still updates, still unexpected twists and turns. It's kind of like a mystery or suspense novel. You never quite know. But we are still seeing some of these large scale like SAT, ACT exams still being impacted by COVID and or smoke from the fires. And so, the impact that we're seeing is generally like short-term cancellation of exams with little notice, for example, on a Saturday SAT. Okay, so just have a heads up there. Generally speaking, your student will not be taking SAT exams. It's generally not encouraged this fall. We'll talk more about the timeline there too. But thinking about what are your priorities and goals, and that's kind of a little bit of where you're identifying. Most schools are not requiring tests and will not require tests when you graduate and you apply. Okay, there are very few that actually do. So talking about your priorities, talk about your testing experience as well. Are you a strong test taker? Okay, are you not a strong test taker? If you're not a strong test taker, maybe just don't even take the test. It's not required for many of your schools that you might be thinking of, and sometimes that can actually help. Okay, so this testing makes sense for you. We do have the PSAT that will be happening, again, with everything that's subject to change, but the anticipation is that will happen on October 26th, this year of 2021. Registration is closed. Okay, so it was a very quick turnaround, and the delay of school didn't help and things like that, but the deadline was earlier this week for us to submit our orders, and so we had to get stuff in to College Board to receive the exam materials by this date. And so this is the only date that this test will be given. It was only open to 10th and 11th graders who were interested and signed up. Okay, so your students, we did get a good number of responses, so your students did have to register using a Google form, and unfortunately if they did not, they will not be able to take the exam this year. And so I apologize about that quick turnaround time. We tried to do several robocalls, several emails to students and notifications that way. But yes, we are locked in for our tests this year. But it is optional. It's a way for students to practice if they desire. Again, if your students like stressing out about tests, just don't do it. I mean, it's really not a hugely hard concept. If your student is a rock star test taker, maybe that'll help them. Okay, but generally speaking, if students are like middle of the road or low test takers, just take one painful part of the process off the table, and the vast majority of colleges that students are going to be applying to won't care. Okay, there's very, very few, and we're talking like 20 or so schools that really require it, and most of them are places where students generally might not think about applying. Okay. Test optional versus test blind is another thing I want to just mention. So as you're doing research, you'll see this more frequently than you would have in the past. Test optional is basically this idea of schools will allow you to apply. All right, so in this optional world, you have the choice of submitting an application. They have a way to evaluate you if you do submit a score, and a way to evaluate you against a student who doesn't submit a score. And this is where the vast majority of schools have actually transitioned to. And this is probably a good outcome of COVID. There's not very many, but this was one that really kind of forced a little bit of colleges' hands of going this route. And I think most high school side of things and college side of things, professionals, think this is a good move. Okay, and test optional is awesome for students and colleges. Okay, so generally speaking, most schools are this way, and this is going to be, like I said, if your student is middle of the road, usually middle of the road test scores are not going to be super impressive to colleges, so it might just be better to not send scores. Doesn't mean you can't take the test, doesn't mean you shouldn't take the test. It's just saying like it could be something that if you are not confident, if you're not sure, if you're not wanting to take the test, you don't have to. Okay. Test blind, on the other hand, this is going to be CSUs and UCs for our state level institutions. That means that schools will not even consider an exam score even if you have one. So that means, if you decided to take an SAT exam this coming spring and you're applying to UC Berkeley, they're not going to look at it. Okay, so generally speaking, if you're going to be applying mostly to CSUs and UCs, don't waste your time, energy, and money on testing. Okay, do other things with your life other than sitting in a classroom for 4 hours on a weekend. All right, so that's kind of a big difference between test blind and test optional. And so this website, if you want to kind of keep updated, is FairTestorg. They're an organization that tracks and advocates for kind of fair testing and evaluation of admissions criteria, but they also keep a list of the schools that have announced that they're test optional. All right. Another couple things around tests are AP exams. All right, and so Like I said, many juniors are taking AP exams this year, and that's something that is great. We encourage that, but there's some process and procedure that has to happen, and it's fairly regimented. So the registration for AP exams will be done online via the student's My AP Classroom portal. Students should be somewhat familiar with this. Their teachers in AP classes will help encourage them to get on there. They can't actually sign up their students, so the student actually has to actively join their AP classroom for each AP class that they're in. And they also have to actively request to take the exam. Okay, so there's kind of 3 phases of registering for the exam. One is joining their classes or their AP classes AP classroom. The second is indicating that yes, I would like to take this exam for every test that they're going to take. Okay, it defaults to unsure or no, meaning if they don't touch it, they join the classroom, they don't touch anything, they're not going to be taking the AP exam. Okay, you have to change it to yes. There's no exceptions to that rule. I can't do it for you. Only the student can. So don't email me about it because I will just say you have to go in and do this. Okay. There is a early deadline, and it sometimes sneaks up on people. You must select yes or no in your exam AP classroom by November 12th. Okay, at noon for all exams. That order will be placed by 2 p.m. and I will not allow changes following this. Okay. And then we'll be looking at payment sometime in December or January. We're still kind of working on some dates there. Okay, but that's kind of the third phase to take an exam is, join the classroom, indicate yes, and then pay the money. All right, and we sent out some information to students. We'll send out some additional information a little bit later this fall timeframe, probably towards the end of September with some details. But if you're curious, you can actually look it up on our counseling website now. They are expected to be offered in person, standard length, normal tests, not like the 20-minute tests that happened, for 2020. Okay, and in the normal testing window of May 2nd to May 13th. The link down below has the exam score dates for the exams or the classes your student may be taking, so you're going to want to mark your calendars now. There are no makeup exams. Only a true emergency like a school evacuation, a national shutdown, things like that, whatever, let us consider an exam makeup. Vacations are not an emergency. I'll say that again. Vacations are not an emergency. Do not book a vacation during this time frame. Okay, and if you do, just expect to not take the AP exam. All right. There is always this potential to change things if COVID kind of changes or morphs over this time frame, but generally expect a normal exam experience this year. Just briefly, trade and technical schools. So again, we talked about it. It's a very focused approach to learning a particular set of skills. Okay, and they have a very high shortage and very well paid, I might add, programs and career paths that let you grow quickly and receive very good compensation for the amount of education and expense to get that education down the road. Okay. You do have very similar thought processes to consider as you're looking at 2- and 4-year schools as trade schools in terms of what you need and what you want. And many of them do also qualify for financial aid. So a couple other thoughts is it's okay to start reaching out to recruiters for the military and Peace Corps, starting to get some information about that from them if you're interested in that area. Another thing that you'll be working on in Pathways this year is working on your resume, cover letters, some of the employability skills, okay? And thinking about the big picture of what do I see for myself in 5 or 10 years, okay? Is there any skills that you can work on or develop now? A skill that's oftentimes underrepresented is kind of that conversational, soft skill elements of kind of like, can you introduce yourself? Can you have a conversation with a stranger? Can you say thank you? Can you be genuine? Can you be honest? Things like that. So, I mean, those are even skills that all students, no matter what their plans are, can practice and will practice throughout this year. So just a couple other last minute thoughts. So no matter what your path, this experience this year and next year will provide a lot of valuable experiences and information, even if it's not, algebra, okay? So just keep an eye out. You can learn a lot from a subject that maybe you're not super interested in. There's a quote that says, the odds of using any specific piece of knowledge that you learn in high school is slim. So like the odds that you're going to need that equation that you learned in physics is very slim. But the odds of using some piece of knowledge from high school is near absolute. The odds of using some piece of knowledge from high school is near absolute, and you have no idea what it's going to be or when it will happen. The biggest thing that you're going to learn is how to learn. Okay, so it doesn't matter what path you're on. The biggest thing that you're going to get out of high school is how you learn and how you engage in learning. Okay, so let's kind of see what the last little bits are here that we're going to cover, and then we'll wrap up our session for today. So just a couple things to think about. Again, buy into school. Okay, you're again stepping into harder classes. Start strong, stay strong all year. Don't wait to start that research process that we kind of talked about, and we will continue talking about for this year. Think critically about those goals. What do you really want? And try to be honest with yourself and with your family. Okay, and families is important. If your kid says, I want to do this, and you're like, nope, you're going to do this. Again, go back. I'm going to be upset with you adults if you try to live vicariously through your child. Okay, this is about them. This is not about you. All right. Do keep track of the things that you're doing, and then take advantage of the opportunities. Go visit the college reps. Come to the workshops. You will not regret it when you are in senior year and when you grow up. Okay. In the winter and spring, this is going to be, again, looking back at that testing information, this is when, if you are going to want to take that SAT or ACT exam, when you might start actually doing that. Okay, it's not uncommon for students to take it several times if you are choosing to test. But again, remember, it's optional. Most schools are not going to need it or have a path where you don't need it. All right. But many students will take it more than once if you are going to go that route. And many times that'll start kind of usually after December of your junior year. And you might take one or two in the spring and maybe one in the fall of your senior year, if you were going to go that path. Okay. And keep your grades up. Like I mentioned, we are going to have some ILPs coming up. I will be reaching out to you all to start setting those up. And if your family needs translation for that, we'll have an avenue to do that as well. It is important to me, and I hope it's important to you, that an adult in your life, and it maybe is not a particular adult, but I hope that you invite an adult in your life to join that, because we need to have a support system and we're part of a team. Okay, so these ILP meetings will happen later this fall and into early winter, and it will take us a couple months to get through all of you. Okay, so we'll be setting up these meetings. They're about a half hour, 45-minute long meetings where we have some pretty specific conversations around your goals, around what interests you, around the different elements of being a junior and preparing for senior year. We'll be reviewing transcripts, where you're at, talking a little about next year, and kind of like how this year's going. So it's a pretty broad meeting, but we try to keep it focused, pointed, and kind of like, essentially really revolving around you. So this is one meeting where you get to be really selfish, students, because I want to hear everything that you think about yourself. All right. So questions are going to be probably best suited for an email, a follow-up meeting, things like that. We will be able to answer a lot of questions at this ILP meeting that I just mentioned, but definitely please reach out if you do have questions, and I'm happy to answer them as best I can. The best probably first filter for any questions that come up after watching this is an email. All right, let's start there, because like I said, I'm going to be doing post-secondary planning meetings. Time is finite, and I want to try to make sure that I'm kind of allocating that well. So let's go through that first filter of shooting me an email with some questions. Based on the content of your questions, I'm either going to type something back, maybe give you a phone call, or I might just say, hey, this is really a meeting question. Why don't you book a meeting with me? We kind of address that. Okay. But definitely, I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I know it's a lot of information, and there's a lot of information, believe it or not, still to come. But here's a first snapshot into the junior year, and then we will continue working on some of this as we go through this junior year and into senior year. So thank you for joining me this afternoon. If you're watching this recording, feel free to back up. Make sure you download the PowerPoint presentation in the comments or in the description down below. But yeah, thanks for joining me. Have a wonderful year, and we'll see you a little later this fall. Cheers.